That's not my job. You can find the house, you can go to open houses. My job is to make sure that you are educated. You know what you're doing, because in a place like San Francisco, probably everywhere, San Diego, you're going to be competing against buyers that have more money, have more education,
Welcome to Old Money, a show dedicated to helping
other
you
things,
build
and
the
you
trust
want the
fund
highest
you
leg
wish
up
were
that you
born
can
with.
possibly get.
Ladies who lunch, listen up. Life is not about looking rich. I want you to build a life and a legacy that feels rich in every sense of the word. If you're ready to stack cash, talk shop, and trade insider secrets, you're in the right place. These are the new rules to old money, so let's get after it. Hello, rich girls. Welcome back to Old Money, the podcast for women building the trust funds they wish they were born with. I am your host, Amber Frankusen, and today I am so happy to introduce you to one of my friends. So many of our listeners have said they have wanted to talk about real estate, about home ownership, about investing in real estate. So I brought you the best, and I know a lot of realtors. Today, we have not only a realtor in San Francisco who specializes in bespoke luxury client experiences, but she is also a former ballerina. She's the founder of Together in Luxury, where she connects premier ballerinas with luxury brands for their marketing campaigns. She's a realtor, a former ballerina, one of my favorite Instagram follows, and just the loveliest woman. By the way, she's also a brain tumor survivor. She's truly the best. Her name is Marina Shiferman. Marina, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Amber. That was quite an introduction.
Well, you're quite a woman. I'm so happy to have you here. And I don't think it would be appropriate for us to start anywhere except for the beginning. You got to tell us about your whole career as a ballerina and how it brought you here today. Like, take us through.
Okay. I was born in Ukraine. My whole family is Russian. We immigrated to America when I was 2, and my parents started me in ballet when I was 7, because ballet is a very prominent art form in Eastern Europe, Western Europe.
Yeah.
So I started ballet when I was 7, and by the age of 14, I was winning competitions, and I was winning like number 1 in Southern California. And all of those winners across America went to New York to compete against each other. And it was at that competition where I was scouted to this very prestigious ballet school in Washington, D.C. It was a Russian boarding school, very famous. I mean, all I wanted to do was be a professional ballerina. That was my whole identity, my whole world. That's what I was good at. That's what people knew me for. That was everything. Mm-hmm. So I went to this ballet boarding school for about a year. And during our last performance, in the most dramatic fashion, I started getting very, very dizzy, and the dizziness wasn't going away. And I fainted, and the whole studio stopped. And my mom flew me back to California, and we found out I had a brain tumor in the cerebellum, which is the part of the brain that controls balance. So I felt it right away. Like, obviously something was wrong right away. And I had felt it for months on and off, but at that point it had grown enough that it just was not going away. I was dizzy for like the whole 2 weeks until I had open brain surgery.
Oh my gosh. Oh my goodness. And how old were you at this point?
I was 15 going on 16 when I had the brain tumor surgery.
Wow.
And right before the surgery, I was under the impression that I'll be back in a week. Like, nothing is really going to change. This isn't a big deal. And of course, everyone let me believe that because I'm a child. Mm-hmm. It became very clear because I was in the hospital for over 2 months afterwards. I couldn't walk. I was skin and bones. I had 2 brain surgeries, millions of complications. I mean, it's a brain surgery. It's huge.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I took about a year of recovery and like a whole mental anguish because my whole identity was gone. I had no idea who I was, why I was here on this earth, what I was going to do in the future, why this happened to me, and I didn't die. You know, there's just so many questions.
Yeah.
So I put away being the sick girl for a long time, and I went to normal high school, normal college, had an amazing time, but I was running from that identity because being the sick girl was my identity at that time. After a rising star, you were the sick girl. Yeah. So I went to college in Arizona, had an amazing time. And then after college, I moved to San Francisco. And I wasn't really the sick girl. So then I was an adult here in San Francisco.
Oh my gosh, what an incredible story. And I'm so curious too of that, you know, losing that identity as a ballerina. I never feel like, I mean, I look at you as my ballerina realtor, like you've never lost that identity. It's still so present in you and the way that you hold yourself and your poise and the connection to art. How does that experience and all of that training, which I'm sure was so intense, how does that show up for you in your day-to-day life or in your career today?
Well, I had to work on getting that identity back because I thought
Mm-hmm.
after the brain tumor, I'm no longer a ballerina. That's not what people know me for. That isn't who I am. So I
Mm-hmm.
moved to San Francisco. I began doing real estate. And it wasn't until maybe 2 or 3 years ago where my husband was like, "Why don't you dance anymore?" And I just started tearing up. And I'm like, I clearly have to deal with this. So I started
Mm-hmm.
seeing a therapist,
Mm-hmm.
and it cleared so much trauma for me that now I'm just like, you know what? I am a ballerina. That is who I am. Even though
Mm-hmm.
I'm not a
Okay.
professional, like that's who I am. So I totally stepped into it now.
I love that. I mean, I've only met you in the last 2, 3 years. So you've brought that identity back. And I'm so glad you have, because I think it's such a unique experience in the story and everything. And I'd love to, right up top, to tell everybody about your new venture, which is Together in Luxury, and what that means to you.
Well, I've been selling real estate in San Francisco for like 10 years. And it's
Uh-huh.
a very luxury space. People have a lot of money. The average houses are very luxury. And I thought, what makes me apart from any other realtor? And it was, I want to give everyone a luxury experience, even if they're not spending 5 million.
Yeah.
Then when I was stepping into my identity of, you know what, I am a ballerina. This is what I was raised with. It shaped me. I
Mm-hmm.
was like, how can I bring this into a new venture? I was itching for something else. I know the world of professional ballet. I was deep,
Mm-hmm.
deep, deep in it. I know the world of luxury, and I know the world of like marketing a luxury property. And it was just like a no-brainer to
Mm-hmm.
kind of bring it together. And at that time, I had met Misty Copeland, who was kind of the pioneer in bringing ballet into luxury brands. I was
Mm-hmm.
like, you know what, I'm going to do it.
I love that.
So I just started with the idea.
It's incredible. I think it's such a worthwhile venture. And it's so funny because, you and I have had talks offline about this as well. And I actually used ballet in the marketing of one of the Tony properties that I helped to bring to market and to sell, called the Park in Bankers Hill. And it's right by Balboa Park in San Diego, which is known for the theater and the museums. And we wanted to attract the type of person that had the appreciation for art, had the appreciation for performance art. And therefore, we had a lot of tie-ins to the art of dance and how that was represented in our property. So I think there's so many ways to, bridge the gap. And I just had a great conversation with a luxury branding and business expert too. We were talking about that of luxury truly is art in different expressions, including in real estate, which is what we're here to talk about today. So how did you decide to get into real estate, Marina? What drove you there?
Well, that was a bit of a journey. After college, I moved to San Francisco to start building my life. And I had to decide what I wanted to do. I knew what kind of woman I wanted to become:
Oh,
successful, financially
okay.
independent, glamorous, sophisticated, beautiful, wearing big hats, taking herself to lunch.
Yes.
And I got a job when I first moved here, and it was like working for someone else. You had to be in the office 9 to 5. And I remember looking out the window and it was sunny and gorgeous. I'm like, I don't want to be here working for someone else's goal. I want to leave. And so I literally left, never looked back. I don't think
Oh my
that's how you're
gosh.
supposed to quit, but I just left. And I had known a realtor. I asked to shadow him for a while. And I was like, you know what? Let me do this, because it is kind of your own business, but you also have support
Mm-hmm.
and able to ask questions and all that
Mm-hmm.
stuff. So I shadowed him and got into it. And it's been 10, 12 years since.
Amazing. Well,
Yeah.
one of the things that you're so great at too, and you have your own podcast to support women with this process, but it's really helping women specifically feel empowered around real estate. And that's really where I want to focus our conversation today and really give both the 101 of buying a home if it's your first home, and then also extrapolating that conversation into what it looks like to invest in real estate. And then, of course, we have to talk about the luxury of it all. So when we talk about real estate, I would love to start with you with the fundamentals, because real estate purchases are some of the largest financial decisions women will ever make in their lives. And it can be super intimidating and overwhelming. So I'd love to make this a beginner's guide to help women take their first steps in real estate, whether it's for a primary residence or an investment property. So if somebody that's listening, Marina, had a goal of buying a home, what are the key steps they would need to take to get started?
Well, I think the first step is always self-reflection. I think you need to sit with yourself and saying, what do I want my life to look like? What kind of woman do I want to be? What do I want my future to look like? And that's really going to answer a lot of questions for you. You need to know where you want to live, what you want your life to look like, and then you can kind of shape around that. So the first step is always self-reflection. And then the second step is getting kind of into the details. You have to find a realtor who you trust and know, who will walk you through the process, explaining to them that you're a first-time home buyer.
Mm-hmm.
And that process can take a while. It's like finding a therapist. It's not always the first person that you
Yeah.
find. Then once you have that, you kind of feel like, okay, I'm not in this alone. She'll explain what you have to do next, whether it's getting your finances in a row. She can tell you what you need for that, connect you to mortgage brokers. And then the second step is really finding out how much you can afford, if it's on your own or if you have an investor like friends or family, getting your financial ducks in a row. And then the process just goes from there. But those are the first 3 steps.
Yeah. And I think one of the things that is so, I don't want to say undervalued because I value it so much, but it doesn't get talked enough about, but it's the way that the realtor you select to work with and how they understand the market. I mean, there's a lot of realtors I know where if they're in a certain market, they know the families in every single home and what their home sold for and when and what the problems are with the house and all of that kind of like inside knowledge. So it goes beyond looking for a house on Redfin. If you're really ready to buy, you really do need to find a reputable partner to guide you in that. So with that being said, can you help explain how you help buyers analyze whether a home is priced correctly or if it's a good investment or if they should explore it more? Like, what are the things that you do, whether it's pulling comps or evaluating by square foot? Like, what do you do to help people?
That is a very loaded question.
Tell me everything.
Basically, it starts with the introduction. They find me some way, but either it's through open house or a referral, and we just have the conversation. What are you thinking? What do you want to do? What's going on? And then if we decide to work together, we get into it. We have a serious first time meeting. It's like a 2-hour long meeting where I kind of just explain the whole process very simply, and I tell them what to do first, second, third step. The job of a realtor is not just finding a house, which a lot of people are like, I can find a house by myself on Redfin.
Right.
Yeah, you can. Like, that's not my job. You can find the house. You can go to open houses. My job is to make sure that you are educated. You know what you're doing, because in a place like San Francisco, probably everywhere, San Diego, you're going to be competing against buyers that have more money, have more education, have just other things, and you want the highest leg up that you can possibly get. So it starts with education, and that takes a while because there's so much to educate on, like the terms of the contract, the process of the contract, strategies. Why would I do this instead of that? So education is the first step. Then looking, kind of opening my buyer's eyes into different areas that they may not have thought about, into areas that they can't afford that fit their criteria. And then once they find the house, then I jump really deep, because once we find the house, then I have to get disclosures for the house, which is like when a seller is selling a house, they pull together all the documents, behind the scenes things, and that's only available to realtors. So we pull that, and it's like a 200-page document that I have to go over with the buyer. I've seen thousands of them. They've probably seen 1 or 2 in their life. We need to go over it. And then we have to go over the purchase agreement, which in San Francisco, it's 7 pages, and you have to go over everything, make sure they completely understand it. And then we fill it out. Then we determine price by comps, by what's been selling, by my gut feeling. Like, I usually know what places are going to sell for before I pull comps. I've been doing this for 10 years in San Francisco. I probably have sold the house like 10 years ago.
Yeah.
And then once we get into contract, then it's managing the whole deal when we're in escrow. And then all the stuff that you don't see, like when the buyer has cold feet, or when the buyer has questions, or when the buyer needs to sign a document that the seller has given you and they're like, what is this? There's so much hand-holding involved. And then surprises. What if we find a surprise inspection? Or what if there's a surprise leak in our final walkthrough? Like, I basically handle the entire thing so the buyer doesn't have to. And that's tied in with the luxury experience that I want to provide.
I love that. I always equate this to the realtor being like the football coach of a team, because there are so many plays that you have to run. There are so many stats that you have to know, right? Like, it's like real estate agents really do understand what homes sold for or what they'll sell for or what the price per square foot was or what all the details are, just like our husbands and boyfriends know football stats and how fast people can run the 40 meter, right? Like it's just ingrained in you. And then there's this network of special teams you can pull in of your inspector or your lender, all these people. And you really are like the conductor to that orchestra. Now, I know the laws in California specifically have changed recently as it relates to working with a real estate agent. Can you explain a little bit or help people be educated on what that means for them? If they're looking for a buyer's agent, are they paying the commission of the buyer's agent, or how does that work now?
General bird's eye view is that historically the seller said, I'm going to pay 6% commission, and that was split evenly between the buyer and the seller, and then that's split between our companies. Mm-hmm. Now, realtors in California are no longer allowed to advertise what the seller is willing to pay. Mm-hmm. So now every person that enters into a real estate relationship, buyer or seller, needs to sign a representation agreement. But that is not new. It's just a new requirement now. But I always had anybody that I was working with sign an exclusive representation agreement with me, even if it's a buyer or a seller. Because I need that commitment. If I'm going to work 110% for you, think about you and your transactions, say no to other people, I need that commitment. So for me, it's always been the same. Mm-hmm. And in that representation agreement, it states how much you're going to get paid, whether it's from the seller or from the buyer. And now when I'm receiving offers, if I'm working with a seller, there's a place in the contract, it was changed, that the buyer can ask the seller to compensate their broker, and the seller can say yes or no. Typically, the seller always says yes. Mm-hmm. So nothing really has changed other than we're not allowed to advertise how much the seller is paying, and you have to ask to be paid. And if the seller says no, then your buyer must pay you. That's it.
That's it. And I think one of the key things that you said here is that real estate relationship, when you enter into a real estate relationship. So if somebody were to go to an open house, for example, and walk in and then sign in, so to speak, and they don't have an agent with them, are they creating a real estate relationship with whomever is holding that open house?
No, absolutely not. Definitely no.
Perfect. So they are allowed to view homes on their own, but when they're ready to buy and have representation, they can go find a buyer's agent and to represent them and then go from there.
Oh, yes. Oh, yeah.
But I think that's really important. And I think, again, I can't underscore this enough. And this is exactly why Marina is on the show, because she not only gets it, but she is, like she said, working 110%. Like I see you on Instagram. I know that what you're doing and you're out there and you know the market so well. You want somebody that is going to coach you through this whole process and be there holding your hand so that you can win the big game or get the big house. So let's talk a little bit about techniques for touring an open house. I just went house hunting with my girlfriend, Molly, who was in town. And, my background is in real estate development. So I look a lot at the structural things in a house. Like when you're walking through a house, I'm looking for, are there cracks in the driveway or cracks in the stucco, and looking for potential issues. Molly called out stuff that I never thought about. She was like, oh gosh, look at that laundry. Like, don't get a front loading laundry. It makes mold. I'm like, oh my God, you're totally right. And then she was looking for hookups in the garage. She's like, that's taking up a lot of closet space. I mean, she's brilliant. What do you advise people to look for or not pay attention to when they're touring homes?
Before my clients tour homes, I always like them to do an exercise, which is if they're buying in a couple, they separate themselves, and I want them to write down everything they want in a house. Everything. A list can be 100 things long. And then they only get to circle 5 that are the most important things to them. Oof. And the 5 are, I have to have it, and the rest are nice to haves. And then if they're with a partner, they make a new list based on that list. So when you're already going in with that mindset, it's a lot easier. Yeah. And then I tell them to use all their senses. Like, you look at the location of the home because you can always remodel later. So the location, what do you see when you're outside? Where do you actually want to be? What neighborhood do you want to live in? Mm-hmm. So I think that it's important to touch things, touch the cabinets, open the doors, open the windows, touch things, smell. You can smell, like, does it smell like wood or paint or mold or trees, or do you smell car pollution? I just tell everyone to use their senses, and also what are the 5 most important things to you?
That's a great tip. I love that, especially noise. Like, what is the traffic like when you're there in the morning versus the evening? And that smell is a good one too, because if somebody has recently painted or done mold remediation, but maybe it's not all the way, you can smell mold. Like, you can definitely, pick up on those things. I think that's a great tip. And then you talked about the buyer's inspection and how important that is. Can you speak a little bit more to what that piece of the process is and what you recommend for buyers when they're going through that part of the transaction?
In San Francisco, it's typical for the seller to do a general inspection and a pest inspection. And they provide those reports in the disclosure package. And they do this because they want a non-contingent offer. They also want a buyer that knows this is the good, the bad, the ugly of the house. Here's all of the information. Give me your best offer. Because I've seen in Southern California where the seller does not do inspections. They get into a contract and it's contingent upon the buyer doing inspection. Obviously, they're going to find something, and obviously they're going to negotiate on price, or the buyer's going to back out. So here we do that preemptively. So when we're going over the disclosure package, the thing I'm looking for is this inspection company credible? Have I worked with them before? Most of the time it's yes, because if the agent's credible. And then if my buyers don't understand something, I always encourage them to call the inspector and talk to them about everything, because that's really the job of the buyer to do their due diligence also. I can say, oh, that's not a big deal, or that is a big deal, but they really need to do that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think in Southern California, we have a lot of people that are doing, independent third-party inspections. But you're right. If you work with a reputable inspector at the beginning, like they have a fiduciary duty to their company to provide an appropriate inspection. And that's one of the jumping off points for negotiation, right? Of getting the seller to fix things or correct items that maybe need correcting before you take ownership of the house, or reducing price or making concessions so that you come into a house that you feel comfortable with. Is that correct?
Yeah, every situation is different. In San Francisco, we typically don't ask the seller to fix things. We just adjust the price.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Because there's so much competition. If you're asking the seller to do something, he's going to say no and go to somebody else, because everyone wants a house here. So
that's so interesting.
You just either have to bite the bullet, know that you're going to have to repair that, or reduce the price somehow.
Interesting. Oh, it's so different. Well, it's not so different down here. I mean, the market has changed a lot since I've been actively selling homes, but I want to talk about something you mentioned as well, that very important word. We're talking about first-time home buyers, but if you're selling a house and then you're going to another one, you're likely going to have a contingent sale. Can you explain? That's one example of a contingent sale, but what does contingent mean?
Contingent in general in a contract means you're subject to. So basically, if you have a contingency, you're like, I want to buy this house for X amount of dollars contingent to me selling my house. So if you don't sell your house, you're not going to buy the new house. You can get out of contract with how many days you put in that contingency. But in San Francisco, no one does that.
It's so crazy.
You sell your house first and then you move on.
And one of the other things too that we used to see a lot, but not anymore because everybody's getting pre-approved, is loan contingencies. Can you speak to why it's so important to work with a mortgage broker before you get into the home buying process?
Well, it's a non-negotiable. In San Francisco, we look at you have to submit your pre-approval letter with your offer. And then we call your lender before we even accept the offer. There's no way that you can submit an offer without either proof of funds, if you're paying all cash, or being pre-approved. Absolutely no way. And then when you have your lender, it's not enough to just tell them things and you get like pre-qualified. You actually have to submit your documents. They have to underwrite you, and then they have to give you like, you're underwritten for this amount of money. That is it's pretty essential, because you don't want to get into a contract on a house, which is a legally binding document, and then realize you don't have any money and then have to back out. Either you're losing your initial deposit or there's other arbitration going on.
Absolutely. I mean, the way that you describe it is so real for how it's happening today. It's competitive. It is stressful. You have to act fast. You have to have all your ducks in a row. It can be, like I said at the beginning of the show, stressful, intimidating. How do you help your buyers or sellers stay calm and grounded during such a huge, important transaction?
Well, they don't stay calm and grounded. But the education piece, it's really important to educate them before they go to look and before they write an offer. The education is really important, because if you find a house right away without being educated, you're like, oh my God, what's the next steps? Oh my God, what do I have to do? you're running around with you don't know what you're going to do. But if you know the process and you have me to call, and we've gone through a couple practice exercises, I've sent you comps already, like you're kind of better. So education is really, really important.
I think that's so true. And also, buying a home is such an emotional purchase, right? You walk into a home, you imagine bringing your baby home from the hospital, or having where your Christmas tree is going to go, and having holidays and your family. So we often walk into places, into spaces, into environments, and emotionally attached to them. And I think that the more emotionally attached that you get without having that education piece first, it can be more of a roller coaster, right?
Oh yeah. People get very attached.
Yeah, to homes that aren't even theirs or not even in their price range. I've done that before too. I think also one of the things as we talk about, getting pre-approved and understanding the difference between what a lender says you can afford and affordability is understanding some of the hidden costs of home ownership. And I like to be really transparent about that because I was raised by a mother who was a realtor and a grandmother who was, and home ownership has always been kind of a core value in my family, but also in this society. But it might not be for everybody at every stage. As they say, rent is the most you'll pay for your housing every month, and your mortgage is probably going to be the least. So what are some of the hidden costs of home ownership that buyers should be prepared for outside of just their mortgage payment?
Right. So their mortgage payment is not hidden. Your lender will explain everything to you, your taxes, your insurance, all that. That's built in, that's your mortgage payment. But the hidden cost, people don't understand what it is to furnish a house. And the repairs. Like your toilet's leaking, you can't just let it go, because if you let it go, then it might start leaking and cause mold and go downstairs and cause this and that. So I tell people probably like 10% of your purchase price every year on just maintaining, repairs, paint. You need to paint your house because you can't just let it go with cracks, because moisture will get in those cracks. It's upkeep for sure. Upkeep and actually like decorating.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things I don't know the answer to this at all, and I'd love your take on it, especially in San Francisco, is there's been a lot of changes with insurance. So obviously when you buy your house and you do your mortgage, you have your property taxes, your insurance built into that monthly cost typically. But when we have all of these, like in LA, we heard about right before the Palisades and Altadena fires, people lost their fire insurance and having to get it back. And then I don't know what earthquake insurance is like in San Francisco these days. And here in San Diego, we have, fire, flood. In Florida, you have hurricane. Like, what does that conversation look like for homeowners? Like, what do they do if all of a sudden their insurance drops them?
That sucks. If their insurance drops them all of a sudden. And you really can't do anything to prepare for that. But what you can do is get the maximum amount of insurance and also do the repairs that are necessary. In San Francisco, we have a lot of old buildings with old wiring, old knobs and tubes, and there's certain insurance companies that will insure on that, and there's certain companies that won't, because if we have an earthquake, that will cause a fire. I've had conversations with my buyers, like, if you buy this, you need to spend 30 grand to upgrade that right now. So that's when I'm saying the repairs on your house to keep it current to today's standards, that's so necessary. Like in San Francisco, we're very prone to earthquakes. So you need to seismically retrofit your house. I know that's not cheap. You might need to do a new foundation every, 10, 20 years, bolt it. You need to take the appropriate steps necessary. But also, disasters happen and we can't always prepare for earthquakes that are devastating and earth shattering, but you need to take the proper steps at least to prepare yourself.
Yeah. So true. Speaking of proper steps, one of the things, going back to our conversation of all the rich girls and rich women who are listening, let's talk about advice that you would have for somebody who is maybe a single woman versus somebody who's in a relationship but not yet married, and the different ways you can talk about taking title and how to protect yourself in that.
It's a really, really good conversation. Well, I never suggest anyone to take title in their own name. I always suggest them to start an LLC because they own the LLC and the LLC is the one that owns the house. Always, always, always. You never know who's going to sue you, but debt collectors are going to come after you. You need to have separation. And you don't want people to look up, where does Amber own a house? Even if you don't know them or you do, you don't want any stalkers.
Yeah. Totally.
So if you're buying as a single woman, you're starting an LLC and you're buying in your LLC or a trust, but you're never buying in your name. But if you're buying with a partner, that's a conversation that you have to have with your partner. If you want your name to be on the house, or not. That's a conversation that you need to have. And it goes beyond just buying a house. It's like, do I want my partner to pay for everything? Am I taking care of everything? He's financially and I'm the other stuff. Like that's a very personal conversation, but the realtor cannot tell. I can just tell them their options, but of course, that's a conversation they need to have.
Yeah. So talk to me about this. Like, let's say a woman and a man or a partnership doesn't have to be heterosexual, but like a partnership buys a home, but they're not married legally. And one person decides to put the house in their name and then they break up. What happens to the other person and the funds that they've contributed to the house?
Well, they need to have an agreement. If you contribute funds to a house that your name isn't on, it's ridiculous and you need to be slapped and told what to do.
Yes.
That's absolutely not okay. But if you have contributed funds, there needs to be an agreement, an LLC agreement. Like these two people own this LLC. This person's contributing X. This person's contributing Y. This is how they distribute the funds. And then the LLC just buys it. It's pretty simple. I mean, you cannot go wrong without an LLC or an email, like some kind of a paper trail.
Yeah, I think that's really huge is just, I think a lot of people, I've even been in this position myself of, oh, I need to get an attorney. How do I do this? Like, I need to write it out. No, just writing it out and having an agreement that's on paper is like the easiest thing you can do to start that, like you said, paper trail. And also really understanding that education piece. Like if you take title, if you are taking title as an unmarried couple, a married couple, California is a community property state. If you contribute separate funds, like how does that all work out? And I think there's a lot there. And quite frankly, it just doesn't make for very good podcast fodder. It's very easy to look up on ChatGPT, but that's one of the most important things I think a woman can do to protect herself and predict the future in multiple scenarios is just understanding how you're going to go into this contract.
Every woman needs to own half of the house, no matter how much she's putting in. I mean, obviously, if she's paying for the whole thing, she owns the house. Yeah.
Can you speak to, just how real estate ownership and the opportunity of real estate can really contribute to long-term financial security for women?
I think it gives you more options. Like, it depends what you want your life to be. I was, when I first moved to San Francisco, living with 6 roommates, sharing 2 bathrooms, and I was ready to upgrade my lifestyle. And I looked at what I can rent a 2-bedroom for, and then I looked at what I can buy a house for, and I was like, no brainer, I'm going to buy a house. And so I bought a house and I rented out 2 bedrooms in my house and lived in the other one. It was perfect because I wanted an upgraded lifestyle. Yes, that brought more responsibility. I was the landlord. I had to fix any issue right away. I had to be responsible for setting the rent, collecting the rent, raising the rent whenever. I had to be responsible for making a lease agreement. So you are upgrading your life. But it does give you options. Like I met a woman the other day that owns a condo and she's like, well, I think I want to go travel. I don't know what I should do. And I was like, well, you have options. You can either sell your place or you can rent it out. It gives you options. If you need money, you have options. You can either refinance if you have grown your equity. You can rent out a couple rooms. You can rent out the whole thing. You can Airbnb it. It just gives you options. Plus, if you own it for long enough, the house will appreciate in value. It'll be worth more than what you bought it for. And that's just money out of thin air. You can literally take that money out and lower your mortgage or do some remodeling or buy another place. Yeah, it just is invaluable. I bought my first place when I was single.
I love that. And I think there's also a lot to say about not only does it give you options in the future, the government incentivizes home ownership and they do so by giving tax credits. Can you speak to that and how people can leverage that opportunity without, this is not tax advice, but just explain it.
Yes, this is not tax advice.
Thank you.
I've always owned all of my homes in an LLC, and an LLC is a business entity. And if you're running it like a business, you can have deductions like expenses. So I didn't own my house. My LLC owned the house and I rented from my LLC. So expenses, I would expense on my taxes, like if I had to fix the toilet, which I did many times, or if I had to do something else. Yeah. But I also recommend getting a good tax bookkeeper because there's things that I have no idea. But an LLC gives you options to deduct depreciation, expenses, and profit. And you pay your taxes differently in an LLC as well.
Yeah, totally. Let's talk about investing in real estate. What does that really mean? Like, explain what that means to invest in real estate and how is that different or is it from buying your primary residence?
Well, there's many different kinds of investors. If you're buying a house to live in, you're like, I'm not going to sell it. I don't care. I just want a house to live in. Whether you like it or not, it's still an investment because you're putting money towards something that may or may not grow in value.
Mm-hmm.
So you're always investing in something. So you always have to think of the future of that investment. And then there's another kind of investor who's just doing it just plainly, how much money am I going to make if I remodel it, or how much money am I going to make when I rented it? So I always talk to everyone that buying real estate is an investment because you will move 5 years, 10 years, 15 years. You're gonna, that's just how life is. And we need to know that. And what are your long-term plans when that happens?
Yeah, absolutely. And so the different types of ways people can invest in real estate, you mentioned a couple of them, like buying something to rent it, so to speak. That's a definitely, like you said, an upgrade in lifestyle, right? If you're going to be collecting income, is that passive? What does that mean? How do somebody get started in that?
Well, in San Francisco, it's very difficult to make money on rent on a house that you just bought because the prices are high. So in San Francisco, I suggest someone buy a house, live in it for a long time, and then when they're ready to move on, you don't have to always sell it. You can take the equity out and then rent it. It's not completely passive income because you always have to keep up with it. Like I said, if there's repairs, you have to be on it. You have to choose your tenants wisely. You have to write up a tenant agreement, probably with a lawyer. You have to do all your expenses, bookkeeping. So it's not completely passive, like if it's an investment with an investment account, but it's really good. And also in San Francisco, there's really strict tenant laws. So clients, after they speak with a tenant attorney, might not want to go through that.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, San Francisco, when I worked in multifamily real estate and we would do fair housing training, what felt like every 5 minutes. But they would always say, California has very favorable tenant laws, but San Francisco is always leading the way with the strictest and most stringent. And the amount that you can raise the rent per month, or, how you advertise, or all those things. What are some of the challenges people see in being a landlord in San Francisco?
mostly eviction. You cannot get a tenant out. They stop paying rent. That's ridiculously not just cause to evict somebody. You want to move in, ridiculously, that's not just cause to evict somebody. So anytime I have a buyer or seller that is playing with that option, they non-negotiably have to talk to a San Francisco real estate attorney to find out their options. And if they want to go through it, great. They don't, that's fine. Yeah, I don't recommend, if you ever want to live in your house again, don't rent it out.
Yeah, it's so true. And, talking to a real estate attorney, that's going to cost you money. And I think one of the things that gets overlooked as well is that investing in real estate is not something you do with your last dollar and then you're going to be living paycheck to paycheck. There are so many instances, one of which that's fresh in my mind is my best friends just bought in a new home community in Newport Beach, and the people across the way from them also bought, but with the intention to rent it out. And it was during the tail end of COVID. That person moved in, paid a deposit, and then never paid rent again. Lived there with their kids, their wife, whatever. They never once paid rent. And because of the backlog of evictions after COVID, it took them 18 months to get them evicted. And then, of course, they missed out on 18 months of that rent money they were counting on. They had to pay for the attorneys the whole way through. And then, wouldn't you know it, when that couple moved out, the house was trashed and they had to basically completely redo it. So making an investment in real estate, it sounds very nice when everything goes very well, when you're renting it out, right? But there are a lot of things that could go wrong, and you need to make sure you have the funds saved to have a contingency plan.
Yeah. Oh, I'm so sorry. That's a horrible story for your friends. I wonder if they used an attorney to write up their lease.
I don't know. It's a really good question. I feel like they marketed it through the realtor they bought it from, if I know the story correctly. It's my friend's neighbors, so I don't know all of the details, but watching from the sidelines, and then everybody in the community is like, okay, this is the family that's not paying rent.
I have a similar story. I helped a friend of mine buy a condo not a couple of years ago. And I said, if you ever rent it out, you let me know. She did not let me know. She went online to find a rental agreement, and I'm hoping and praying for her every day that her tenants keep paying, because if they don't, there's nothing she can do. But if they used an attorney, there are many things that they could do.
Yeah, you just made me say something, or you just said something that made me think of something as well, which is, again, I don't want to call it a hidden cost of home ownership, but it may be a surprising cost. My whole family is from San Francisco. My cousin currently owns a condo on Van Ness, and he's trying to move for his job. And his HOA just went up by 100% within the last 3 years because of insurance costs and maintenance costs going up. So it's one of those things where you sign on the dotted line and you acknowledge that this cost might be variable, but not knowing that that is going to be something that's a reality can be a rude awakening. How do you help people prepare for those types of scenarios?
You can't. You just have to tell them that your costs may go up and that you
Yeah.
will have costs in your home ownership that you
Mm-hmm.
don't foresee. Yeah, this buying a house is not for people that don't have savings or that don't have a good job or don't have other investments. This is a really intense thing to do.
Mm-hmm. What would you say? I mean, as we are talking to women about wanting to build wealth through real estate, what opportunities should they look for? If there are certain financing options or strategies or ways they should approach this process that would be advantageous?
I'm sure in other parts of the country, there are probably first time home buyer incentives. You can put less down or whatever. But unfortunately, San Francisco, it's not like that.
Mm-hmm.
If you really want to do home ownership and you might not be able to afford it, but you're in the right place in your life and you are business savvy and you have a business plan, maybe get an investor, not friends, family. Because
Right.
when I first bought my first house, I knew exactly what I wanted to do. I wrote out a whole business plan and I went to my parents. I'm like, this is how much I need. This is how much you're going to get after we do this. And they helped me. And then I paid them back 400 grand after I sold it. So getting an investor that's someone that you can trust, but obviously having everything in writing. It wasn't just like,
Mm-hmm.
hey, great, I'll just deposit you money. Everything is in writing.
Yeah. And an investment, everyone, that's different than a gift. So, if you're going to make an investment, like if you're hoping for a return, right? So honoring that relationship, especially with your family, I think is really key.
Even sometimes I work with clients all the time whose family is giving them money, but their names are on the deed as well in a different
Mm,
percentage of ownership. But that's with the family kind of
right.
determining.
I love it. Well, let's talk about the luxury market because I know that's something you know a lot about.
Yes.
Talk to me a little bit about what are people looking for in luxury properties these days? What are women looking for in luxury properties these days?
Everything. Everything must be perfect in a luxury property. But it really just depends. I mean, no matter how much money you have to spend, you always want more than you can afford. Clients with a $10 million budget want a $15 million home with a $10 million budget. They want everything. I think what matters to them most, especially in San Francisco, is the location. The location, like the exact street, the exact location is the most important thing to a luxury buyer. Privacy or the ability to create privacy, whether it's with plants or fences or whatever, but privacy is huge because really wealthy people, they know they're going to remodel. It's a given. They
Mhm.
don't really care what the bathroom looks like. They don't care what the closet looks like. They're going to remodel. So
Mhm.
location and privacy are really, really important to them. Also, they don't have time for bullshit. Like they don't have time to waste time. So you as their realtor need to give them everything they want now, a luxury experience.
Yeah. Tell me what that means. What does a luxury experience mean to you?
Well, you have to ask them how communication they want, what kind of communication they want, because with a luxury buyer, it's probably not their first time and they
Mhm.
always think they know everything, but
Mhm.
things change. Like this new
Yeah.
commission thing changed and
Mhm.
areas change and houses change. So you have to go about it in a very respectful manner. Like they don't have 2 hours to spend on a buyer consultation call. So you need to
Mhm.
come to wherever they are. You need to go to their workplace, you need to go to their home and like explain things as concisely as possible. You need to kind of work around them to give them
Yeah.
the luxury experience.
Customization, like what fits your preferences and how can I meet you there?
Yeah, yeah, because if you're not going to give it to them, somebody else will.
Oh, it's so true. It's competitive out there. What are your predictions for the market to come in San Francisco or in the luxury market? Like, what do you see in the next 5, 10 years?
Well, we took a really big hit during COVID, and the market is still recovering from that. Last year was, I think, one of the worst years in real estate. We had the lowest number of sales here in San Francisco. And before the pandemic, everything was selling in less than 10 days, 8 days, condos, TICs, houses. It didn't matter what street, didn't matter if you were on the road, everything was selling quickly. And it's not the case anymore. I mean, I helped a seller sell his property. It took us a month, which is unheard of, like in San Francisco. And he was kind of stressing out. It's unheard of, but some houses sell in like 3 days. So you have to just keep going with what's going on. You have to go with the flow, maintain your cool. Mm-hmm. I think that we're still going to see what we're kind of seeing, which is some properties will have a lot of competition, sell quickly. Some properties will sit on the market for no logical reason. And you have to not rest on your laurels. You can't be like, oh, that property is going to sit in 2 weeks. I have time to look at the disclosures, because it might be gone right under you. Mm-hmm. We're not really seeing offer dates that much anymore, which is you had a time and a date because there was a ton of competition. Now it's like you can get an offer at any time. I think we're going to see a little bit more inventory. Like I've already started to have a lot of conversations with people who are in the next year or two getting ready to move. Mm-hmm. But I don't think we're going to be at 2018 anytime soon when everything was just booming.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's interesting because, I mean, there's a lot of conversation about, especially the generation that I call it a generation, but I don't mean to say like boomers or millennials, but the generation of people who bought a home when interest rates were at 2.5% and wanting to hold on to that interest rate for a very long time. They're less incentivized to move when the, cost per month is going to go up triple, quadruple, because interest rates are now at 6 and whatever, right? So I think the best thing for anybody out there that's listening, that's interested in real estate and trying to make a prediction, to remember is that you need to have somebody on your team who actually knows what's going on. Someone like Marina, who's seeing what's happening in the market and understands the context for things long-term. My grandmother bought her house in the 70s in San Francisco, and she bought at an 18% interest rate. And granted, the affordability of the house is, 15x since then. Or the value of the house that she bought it at, but it still took her a very long time to pay it off. And I think having that perspective in the longer term, it's not horrible that rates are where they are, and they will fluctuate and things will change. Nothing stays the same forever.
That's what I've been saying. People are like, interest rates are crazy. I'm like, what are you talking about? 70s, 80s, 90s, 17%. People still bought houses. In the long run, you're going to be happy that you did if you bought it in the 70s. Like, let's keep it in proportion here, guys.
If you could, in closing here, give one piece of advice to women thinking about real estate, whether it's buying for a primary residence or investing or entering the industry, what would you say?
If you're thinking about buying, get a realtor. Even if you're not going to buy tomorrow, you don't pay them, if at all, until the deal's done. Mm-hmm. You need to get a realtor because this is something we do full time. I know everything about real estate. Most first-time buyers know nothing about real estate. So you need to get someone, and it will relieve so much stress. Know that you can have anyone that you can call, text at any time. If someone is thinking about getting into the industry, I never encourage it. It's a hard industry.
Yeah. My mom said the same thing to me and actually discouraged me from getting my real estate license. She said, I will not support you in doing that. It is cutthroat. How do you keep your cool and take care of yourself in such a volatile industry?
Sometimes you can't. Sometimes people make you so upset, the disrespect that you see. Like sometimes you just can't. Like you go on a listing appointment and you work so hard on creating a presentation and they ghost you, and a year later you see the house is on the market with someone else. I've had sometimes that happen. Sometimes it doesn't really affect me, but sometimes it really, really does. And you just have to like take a walk. But usually I try to this is business. This is not personal. This is business. And I know that I'm really, really good at what I do. But sometimes it just gets to you. We're only human.
100%. Okay, before I let you go today, Marina, I want to go through our rapid fire rich girl questions so I can learn a little bit more about you. Are you ready for this?
Yes.
Okay, tell me this. What's your favorite place to vacation?
Somewhere warm, like the south of France.
I love that. Do you have a favorite hotel or resort, or are you renting a home?
I like to rent a home. I like to have my own space. I like to have my own everything. I'm not a
I love
hotel girl unless it's like go to the hotel bar, but I like to have my own place. And I like to rent a car and live like I live in that place.
That's a beautiful approach. What is the best investment you've ever made?
My first house, absolutely.
What is your guilty pleasure?
My guilty pleasure. Shopping. I love clothes. I love luxury. I love expensive things. I love shopping.
You have great taste, so I fully support it. I co-sign because I get inspiration from your outfits all the time.
Thanks.
What is some advice you would give to 21-year-old you?
I wouldn't give her any advice. Everything happens for a reason. You need to live your life. I wouldn't give her any advice. She wouldn't take it anyway.
I love that. That's a great answer. And then what in your life makes you feel the wealthiest?
Vacations. Well, I mean, obviously closing deals and getting a lot of money makes me feel fulfilled, like I'm actually good at my job and I'm appreciated. But luxury vacations. I only want to take a vacation if it's in luxury.
Absolutely. Do you have anything on the calendar coming up?
My husband and I are deciding where we want to spend a month in September in Europe. I don't know. It's between Barcelona or maybe Geneva or Austria. I don't know.
That feels so expansive, just saying those different cities in that month of time. That feels incredible. Marina, thank you so much for spending time with me and the Rich Girls on Old Money. We will link you in the show notes so people can come find you, but tell us where they should look for you.
Instagram.
What's your handle?
Marina Shiferman.
Easy.
Yeah.
I love it. Again, thank you so much for being here, our real estate queen. I appreciate you so much. Again, also follow her online at Together in Luxury. I think it's just an incredible mission that you've put together, and I'm so happy to have you on the show. Thank you so much. Feeling rich? I hope so. Thank you for joining me on this episode of Old Money. If you have questions you want answered, email me at oldmoneypodcast@gmail.com or hit us up on social. We are at Old Money Podcast, and I am at your service. If this episode spoke to you, inspired you, helped you, if you took a single note, it would mean the world to me if you could please just take a minute to rate and review the podcast. And if you're not doing so already, subscribe. And if you have friends who like getting rich, please share this episode with them, even if it's just on your Instagram story. And I'd love you more than Jeff Bezos loves Amazon Prime. Thank you so much, and I will talk to you on the next episode. Remember, I'm not your lawyer, I'm not your tax professional, and I'm not your financial advisor. The content presented in this podcast is intended to entertain, educate, inspire, and support listeners in their personal and professional development and does not constitute business, financial, or legal advice. In addition to that, this episode may contain paid endorsements and advertisements for products and services.